It's one of the most terrifying places that I have ever traveled to. Hi, this is the host. And in this video, we are going to be traveling to an abandoned asylum that is said to be haunted. The place is known as Ravenhurst Asylum, and it was abandoned many years ago. But people say that the spirits of the lost patients are still there and they will not rest. And people also say that if you go to the asylum, you won't leave the same way that you came in. So today, we are going to be heading over to this asylum and seeing what we can find. The last official count showed that over 9,000 of you guys watched my last video, and more than 800 of you commented your thoughts. So thank you all so much. It means the world to me. And for those of you that are new here, welcome, and I hope you enjoy the video. Now without further ado, let's get into it. It has been about 2 years since I last explored Ravenhurst Asylum. And while I was there, strange things happened, like how some of our equipment started to malfunction, and then when we were about to leave, a door slammed shut behind us. But I am hoping that today will be a bit different, and that I can actually get some good footage and maybe even hear some EVPs. When I got to the asylum, I noticed that it was extremely overgrown and that parts of the roof had caved in. Then as I started to walk around the side of the building, I noticed something else that made my heart sink. Someone had spray painted a pentagram onto the side of the building, and underneath it someone had written, "Satan lives." This wasn't there when I was here last time, so I don't know who did this or why they did it. But I just hope that it isn't a sign of things to come. I then continued to walk around the building until I found the front entrance, and that S when I began exploring. As I walked through the front door, I could feel the heaviness of the place, and I could unhelp but wonder what kind of pain and suffering had happened here in the past. 8. Then after exploring a bit more, I found this room with the walls completely scratched up. And at this point, I had heard so many stories from other paranormal investigators about what happens when you scratch the walls that I couldn't resist. So I took out my trusty pen, and I scratched my name into the wall. After a while, I decided to take the stairs up to the second floor, and that's when I found a few patient rooms. In one of them, I noticed that the bed was broken and the sheets were ripped up, which told me that whatever happened here was very violent. And in another room, I saw patient files that were literally everywhere, and it looked like whoever they belonged to left in a rush. But before I could explore any further, I heard footsteps above me. And because I didn't have any flashlights with me, I turned my phone's flashlight on, and I started to look around to see if I could see anyone up there. But I didn't see anything, so I assumed that it was just my imagination. But then I heard footsteps again, and this time, they were definitely coming from inside the vents. So then I grabbed my microphone, and I started to investigate. I asked if anyone was up there, and then I started to ask some follow-up questions. But just as I was about to give up, I thought I heard a response. When I listened back to the recording, it sounded like footsteps followed by a voice saying, "Get out." So I quickly backed away from the vent, and then I decided to move to another room. In this one, I could see that the walls had been scratched up a lot, and in certain areas there were markings that looked like bruises. And while I was taking this all in, I felt the hair on my neck stand up, and I heard what sounded like chains dragging metal moans. So I grabbed my camera, and I started to investigate. But before I could ask anything, I heard what sounded like a scream in the distance. And although I had my phone's flashlight on, it wasn't bright enough to see anything, so I turned off my camera, and I waited in the dark for a few minutes. After a while, I heard footsteps coming down the hall, and they sounded heavy, like someone was stomping on purpose. So I tried to make myself as small as possible, and I hid behind a door. Then when I heard the footsteps get closer, I could see that they were coming from this one particular room. And when I opened the door, it was clear that whatever was making those sounds was no longer there. The room was empty, and the only thing that stood out was a bed with what appeared to be bloodstains on it. At this point, I started to get really scared. And when I turned my phone's flashlight on, I noticed scratches all over the walls, and some of them were even fresh, like they had been done within the last hour. And this is when I knew that I had to get out of there. So I ran down the stairs and outside, and once I got far enough away, I started to calm down a bit. But then I realized that I had forgotten my backpack inside, and it had all of my equipment in it. So I had no choice but to go back in and get it. As I walked back towards the door, I could feel my heart beating out of my chest, and I kept telling myself that I would be okay. but when I got inside I realized that I had made a terrible mistake. At this point, the sun had gone down, and the only light that was getting in was from the windows, which meant that it was pitch black in most of the rooms and the wind had picked up, so the windows were making a horrible sound. But despite all of this, I knew that I had to find my bag, so I started to search around. While I was doing this, I heard what sounded like whispers in the vents, and at first I thought nothing of it. But then I heard footsteps coming down the hall, and I knew that whatever was there was getting closer. I started to run around the building trying to find my bag, and every time I turned my phone's flashlight on, I would see that there were things in the rooms, like how there were beds that were completely torn apart, and there were even gurneys that had blood on them. And while I was going from room to room, I kept hearing footsteps and whispers, but I couldn't see anything. Then all of a sudden the temperature dropped, and I could feel a presence with me. And when I turned around, I saw what appeared to be a shadow figure standing at the end of the hall. And just like that, it was gone. So I continued to search for my bag in that S when I found it near the front door. But then as I reached for it, I heard chains dragging metal moans again. So I quickly grabbed my bag and then I ran. I sprinted to the front door, and as I was running, I could hear chains dragging moans behind me, and I could feel the presence getting closer and closer. And just as I reached the door, I turned around, and I could see a shadow figure lunging at me. I screamed, and then I kept running. I made it outside, and I started to catch my breath. But then I noticed that the front door had sealed itself shut, and it wasn't letting me back in. I pounded on it, but it wouldn't open. And at this point I knew that I had no choice but to stay out there until morning, so I sat down and I waited. I spent the entire night out there listening to the wind, and the rain, and I could have sworn that I heard chains dragging moans and footsteps. But in the end, I survived the night, and I made it out alive. If you want to hear more scary stories from abandoned places, stay tuned for more updates. The floorboards creaked under my feet, their mournful song echoing in the cavernous space. As I ventured deeper into the abandoned mental asylum, I couldn't shake off the feeling that I wasn't alone. I could feel eyes boring into my back, icy fingers trailing down my spine. I'd heard stories about this place, rumors of horrifying experiments conducted within its four walls, of patients driven to madness by the cruel whims of doctors who seemed more interested in playing God than healing the sick. Now, flashlight in hand, I was exploring these very halls myself, uncovering secrets that had remained hidden for decades. It was here in the basement, in the very heart of the asylum, that I discovered the first of its many hidden tunnels. Carved into the damp earth, it was a narrow passage barely wide enough for me to fit through. Curiosity gnawed at me, urging me forward. I pushed aside the cobwebs and grime, making myself smaller until I could slip through the opening. On the other side, I found a small room with a single metal door. It was locked, its surface cold and unforgiving under my touch. Then I noticed a loose brick in the wall, revealing a keyhole. In my pocket, an old skeleton key that I'd found earlier fit perfectly. As the lock clicked open, a musty smell wafted out, mingling with something faintly metallic, like old blood. Inside, rows upon rows of syringes gleamed under the dim light filtering through grimy windows. Among them lay scattered documents detailing treatments so bizarre they sounded more like curses than medicine. One caught my eye. It's a detailed diagram of the human nervous system with handwritten notes describing experiments, tests of endurance, of pain. But what truly made my blood run cold were the names scribbled beside each body part. Names of patients who'd become unwitting guinea pigs in the asylum's dark experiments. I fled the room, the images burned into my mind. Back in the main corridor, I continued my exploration, drawn deeper into the labyrinthine depths of the building. The air grew colder, the silence heavier, as if the very walls were holding their breath. Then I heard it. A whisper, soft at first, then growing in volume, swirling around me, weaving tales of unspeakable horrors. The asylum was whispering its history, its pain, its regrets. I pressed on, desperate to understand, to make sense of the madness that had unfolded here. That's when I saw it, a door concealed behind a tapestry hanging askew, its paint flaking, its surface cold and lifeless under my touch. As I stepped through, I found myself in a long, narrow room lined with beds. Each bed was neatly made, but empty. I walked the length of the room, the silence deafening, until I reached the far end. There, 2 figures stood motionless, their backs to me. I called out, my voice echoing in the vast emptiness. They didn't respond. I approached, my heart pounding, and turned them around. But there was no one there, only 2 empty beds, 2 figures of linen in shadow. Suddenly, the room shifted, the beds moving, reforming into 2 distinct shapes. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. Before me stood 2 nurses, their uniforms crisp, their faces pale, their eyes hollow and distant, staring into the abyss. They began to move, not with the jerky motions of puppets, but with the fluid grace of living beings. They glided towards me, their footsteps silent, their presence a growing chill in the air. I wanted to scream, to flee, but terror had frozen me in place. Then they stopped, hovering just out of reach, their gazes boring into me. They didn't speak, but their eyes did, filled with unspeakable horrors, with years of suffering and neglect. I saw their last moments reflected in those vacant pools. The pain, the fear, the slow, terrible realization that they'd become nothing more than lab specimens. Their humanity dissected and discarded by the very institution that should have cared for them. One of the nurses raised a finger, pointing to herself. Her lips moved, forming words, but none came out, only a raspy whisper that brushed against my ears. "Sarah," she mouthed, her eyes pleading. Then she pointed to the other, her companion, whose name I learned with a shudder, was Mary. They glided back to their beds, fading into the linen and shadows as quickly as they'd appeared. And just as suddenly, the room was still, silent, empty. With trembling hands, I explored further, finding a small, intricately carved box tucked under one of the beds. It was heavy, cold, its surface smooth and worn with age. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, lay a collection of children's toys, a rocking horse, a porcelain doll, a wooden train. They looked ancient yet oddly well preserved, untouched by the decay that permeated the rest of the asylum. A sudden sound made me jump. A child's laughter echoed through the room, tinkling and sweet. I spun around, but there was no one there. From the corner I saw it, a rocking chair moving on its own. The porcelain doll on my lap began to turn its head, its painted eyes staring directly at me. Fear turned to ice in my veins. I wanted to run, to tear my gaze away from the macabre scene, but I couldn't. I was transfixed, held captive by the ghastly spectacle. Then the doll's eyes rolled back, revealing nothing but bottomless pits of black. I finally tore my gaze away, stumbling back as I heard the faint strains of a lullaby. The rocking chair swayed faster, and from the corner, the laughing child emerged. He was a vision of innocence and horror, his skin stretched taut over his bones, his eyes wide and vacant, his clothes tattered and dirty. He glided towards me, his laughter turning into a mocking taunt, his form wavering like a heat haze. I tried to scream, but my voice failed me. My mind screamed in my head, clawing, scratching, begging for escape. The child stopped before me, reaching out a skeletal hand. His touch sent a jolt of ice through me, numbing my entire being. And then he was gone, vanishing like mist in the morning sun, leaving behind only the lingering scent of decay and a single chilling whisper. "Play with me." I fled the room, racing through the asylum's echoing halls, desperately seeking an escape from the haunting nursery. As I ran, more voices joined the chorus, murmuring, calling, their tones a blend of despair and delight. I found more patients, not in the halls, but frozen in the rooms I passed, forever trapped in the final moments of their lives. There was a man strapped to a table in what I assumed was the operating room, his eyes wide with terror. Beside him, instruments lay scattered, stained with what looked disturbingly like blood. In another room, a woman paced frantically, her arms outstretched, as if trying to grab hold of something just out of sight. Her hair was wild, her eyes blank, her mouth forming silent screams. Everywhere I went, I saw them, the patients, their bodies contorted in postures of pain, fear, madness. Some were nurses, some were doctors, some were ordinary men, women, and children. They were all here, victims of the asylum's cruel experiments, forever stuck in the final moments of their lives. I felt my grip on reality slipping. Was I going mad? Were the ghosts haunting me, driving me to the edge? Or was I becoming one of them, another lost soul trapped within the asylum's cold embrace. I needed to escape, to break free of the suffocating past that seemed determined to consume me whole. But as I searched for the exit, I found something else, a secret wing of the building, its existence a mystery even to me. Hidden behind a false wall, concealed by layers of cobwebs and dust, it was a place untouched by time, its rooms pristine, its hallways eerily silent. At the end of the hall, a single door stood ajar, revealing a dimly lit office. Inside, on a large oak desk, lay a leather-bound journal. Its pages filled with neat script chronicled the asylum's darkest secrets, detailing the cruel experiments, the isolation, the pain inflicted on the innocent souls held within its walls. It spoke of a special ward, a place where patients were left to die, where their cries could be heard, muffled and weak until they faded away completely, leaving the staff to marvel at the resilience of the human spirit. It was a place they called the Silent Ward. As I read, a chill snaked down my spine. This was the asylum's most sinister secret, its most shameful act, and I was the only one who knew about it. Then I saw it, an entry dated 1947. The doctor wrote about a new arrival, a young girl who'd been brought in for observation, having exhibited strange behaviors and an unsettling knowledge of things beyond her years. He planned to observe her, to study her, to poke and prod until he unlocked the secrets hiding beneath her innocent facade. I slammed the journal shut, disgusted by what I'd learned, horrified by the thought of such cruelty existing in our world. But then I looked closer, my eyes drawn to the edges of the pages. Where, written in a different hand, were the words, "He doesn't know we're here." Startled, I looked up, my heart pounding in my chest. Who was here? Who was watching me, listening to my every move? I spun around, searching for the source of the words, but saw nothing but the shadows dancing in the flickering candlelight. Was I truly alone in this place? Or were the spirits of the asylum's lost souls sharing their story, hoping that someone, anyone, would hear their tale of suffering and help them find peace? You should leave now. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. From the darkest depths of hell itself, the journal spoke of a final patient, a tormented soul that anchored itself within the walls of the asylum, trapping the spirits of the damned for eternity. And with each passing year, the influence of this final patient grew stronger, making escape more difficult. There were rumors that the final patient was a powerful witch who refused to leave his mortal coil. But the only way to escape the asylum was to find this witch, to banish him to hell where he belonged. As Daniel read these entries, he felt a growing sense of dread in his gut. It was as if the very pages of the book were reaching out to him, their icy fingers curling around his heart. He had come to Ravenhurst Asylum with the intention of finding the source of the haunting, putting an end to the restless spirits that plagued the halls. But now he wasn't so sure. What if the journal was right? What if the true horror of Ravenhurst lay not in the spirits, but in something far more sinister, something that whispered to him from the shadows? He pushed the thought away. It was just a story, a folk tale designed to scare children. Surely there was no truth to it. The final patient was just another lost soul seeking peace, just like the rest. With renewed determination, Daniel descended deeper into the labyrinthine halls of Ravenhurst. Each step echoed the loneliness of the damned, each creaking floorboard a lament for the lost. The air grew colder, the darkness thicker, as if the very walls of the asylum were closing in on him, determined to keep their secrets buried. He continued on, driven by a morbid curiosity and a need to uncover the truth. As the night wore on, Daniel came across a room unlike any he'd seen before. Its door was made of solid iron, reinforced with heavy chains, and locked with a padlock that seemed impossibly old. The air around the door thrummed with a low, constant hum, like the steady beat of a gigantic heart. The sight of the locked door sent a jolt of adrenaline through Daniel. Was this the source of the asylum's haunting? Was this the secret that the asylum's architects had so desperately tried to hide? His heart pounded in his chest, a frantic tattoo against his ribs as he reached out and rapped sharply on the iron. A single resounding clang that echoed through the silent halls. There was no response. Of course there was no response. It was just a wall, a figment of his imagination fueled by fear and fatigue. Yet his rational mind screamed at him to run, to get as far away from this place as possible. But as he turned to go, a soft voice, barely a whisper, seemed to emanate from the very core of the locked door. "Let me out." The voice was thin and reedy, like the last breath of a fading ember. It spoke to him of unimaginable horrors, of souls twisted beyond recognition. With trembling hands, he reached out and pressed his ear against the cold, unyielding metal. The voice grew louder, more insistent, like a supplicant begging for mercy. "Let me out. Help me." It was a child's voice, innocent and sweet, yet edged with an otherworldly terror. Daniel stumbled back, his mind reeling from what he had just heard. Had he really imagined it? Was he truly hearing the cries of a tormented soul trapped behind that unforgiving iron door? His gaze fell on the padlock securing the door, its heavy chains dangling like the shackles of a prisoner. With shaking hands, he reached out and gripped the cold metal. In that instant, he knew he couldn't leave. Not now. Not when a life, perhaps more than one, hung in the balance. He fought against the chains as if they were bonds of his own making, his muscles screaming in protest. Finally, the lock gave way, crashing to the floor with a deafening clang. The sound reverberated through the asylum, bouncing off the cold, damp walls like a gunshot in a tomb. The air grew thick with anticipation, charged with the electricity of the unknown. He pushed the door open slowly, as if afraid to disturb a slumbering beast. The darkness within seemed to reach out for him, beckoning him forward with the promise of unspeakable horrors. He stepped inside and closed the door softly, shutting out the last vestiges of the outside world. The air within the room was stagnant, heavy with the scent of decay and despair. The darkness was absolute, impenetrable. Daniel hesitated for a moment, his heart pounding against his ribs like a trapped bird. Then he took a deep breath and plunged into the darkness, his flashlight cutting a feeble swath through the oppressive gloom. In the flickering beam of his light, he saw it. A rocking chair, its back to him, slowly swaying back and forth as if propelled by an invisible force. The rhythmic creaking of the chair was like a metronome marking time in this silent tomb. He could feel the weight of unseen eyes upon him, judging, scrutinizing every move he made. The hair on the back of his neck prickled with a sudden awareness of utter vulnerability. Taking a hesitant step forward, he felt the floor give way slightly under his weight, and a wave of dizziness swept over him. As he steadied himself, he noticed that the walls seemed to be closing in on him, the darkness pressing in like a suffocating blanket. He could hear his own breathing, amplified in the stillness, each inhale and exhale echoing in the vast emptiness. Then he heard it again, the faint sound of footsteps padding silently behind him. He whirled around, his flashlight beam slashing wildly in search of the source of the noise, but saw nothing. Just as suddenly, the footsteps stopped. Daniel stood frozen in the center of the room, his flashlight beam trembling slightly. He could feel the presence behind him, watching, waiting. And then he knew. This place, this asylum, it wasn't just a building. It was a living, breathing entity, feeding on his fear, reveling in his despair. And he was exactly where it wanted him to be. Trapped in its clutches, lost in its labyrinthine halls, he was just another soul it could claim as its own. As the hours slipped by, the darkness around him seemed to grow deeper, more oppressive. The whispers started subtly, like the rustling of leaves in a distant forest. But as the night wore on, they grew louder, more insistent. They circled around him, weaving tales of unspeakable horrors, their voices echoing in his mind long after he had heard them. With each passing moment, he felt himself slipping deeper into the abyss, his sanity hanging by a thread. He stumbled through the asylum, his flashlight flickering wildly, the beam dancing on the walls as if mocking his growing madness. Faces leered at him from the darkness, their eyes hollow pits of despair. He could feel their presence, cold and clammy, seeping into his bones, chilling him to the very core. He ran, blindly, desperately, through the endless corridors of the asylum. The whispers growing louder, their words slithering into his mind, coiling around his thoughts like venomous snakes. He could feel the asylum's presence all around him, a suffocating blanket of darkness and despair. And then he saw it, a glimmer of light in the distance, a beacon of hope in the suffocating darkness. With renewed determination, he stumbled towards the light, his heart pounding in his chest like a drum. As he approached, the whispers faded, the darkness retreated, and the asylum's grip on his sanity loosened. When he reached the source of the light, he found a window at the end of a long corridor. It was small, barely big enough for a person to squeeze through, but it offered a glimpse of freedom, a chance to escape the suffocating grasp of Ravenhurst. With newfound strength, he threw himself against the window, the glass shattering into 1,000 pieces. Gasping for breath, he crawled through the opening, ignoring the shards of glass that tore at his skin. As he pulled himself to his feet, he looked back at the asylum, its darkness receding in the distance. But even as he stumbled away, he could hear the whispers, their voices slithering through the cracks, following him still. And in that moment, he knew he would never truly be free. The asylum had claimed him, body and soul, and he was now one with the damned, forever trapped in the labyrinth of Ravenhurst. Years later, another explorer ventured into Ravenhurst, drawn by the asylum's dark reputation and the promise of a thrilling tale. As he wandered through the silent halls, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. And then he heard it, a soft whisper echoing through the empty corridors. "Help me." The voice was faint, but it carried an urgency that tugged at his heartstrings. He followed the sound, his footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness, until he came to a room at the end of a long corridor. The door was slightly ajar, and as he peered through the opening, he saw a rocking chair swaying gently back and forth. On the other side of the room, a faint glow emanating from the corner. Curiosity piqued. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was bare except for the rocking chair and the glowing figure in the corner. As he cautiously approached, he realized that the glow was coming from a man sitting in the corner, his back to him. The man was dressed in clothes that looked like they had been made in the early 20th century, and his head was bowed as if in prayer. "Hello!" the explorer called out, his voice echoing in the silent room. The man in the corner didn't respond, and the explorer couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. He took a hesitant step forward, and then another, until he was standing directly in front of the man. And that's when he heard it again. The voice barely a whisper, yet somehow clear as day. "Daniel." The man in the corner turned slowly, his face obscured by the shadows. "Daniel?" he said again, his voice raspy and weak. "Is that you, Daniel?"